For those of you listening who are professional brewers, I'm here to tell you that planning brew schedules just got easier. Starting now, Imperial Yeast guarantees that commercial orders up to 20 liters of 3 of their most popular strains will ship free if they're not in stock when you place your order. So in addition to pitching right with the highest quality yeast on the market, they're promising that yeast will be ready when you need it or shipping is on them. A rad deal from a rad company. Whether you're a pro or a home brewer, if you haven't tried Imperial Yeast in your brewery yet, it's time to up your game. You can check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and place your commercial orders at imperialyeast.com. For those of us who live north of the equator, the weather is heating up, summer is here, and many of us have shifted our brewing focus to styles that are crisp, clean, and refreshing, perfect for hanging poolside with friends. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and the focus today is one of my favorite warm weather quaffers, Kölsch. And joining me to talk about it is Brewlosophy's newest contributor, Cade Job.
Kölsch is actually my favorite style, and I know this because when I was studying for my Cicerone exam about a year or so back, I actually had to go and buy like 60 different styles of German beers, literally 60 bottles, individual bottles from my local liquor store. You should have seen me roll up with my shopping cart.
Yeah, rough life there, man. Jeez.
Yeah. But I was sitting there drinking, and I was drinking that Riesdorf Kölsch, and I drank that beer like right next to a couple of other Pilsners and a couple of other things. And man, I was just like, this is what I drink.
Yeah, I love that beer as well. That was the first commercial example of Kölsch that I ever had, and like you, it's hard for me to say that any one style is my all-time favorite, but I do love me some Kölsch. I pretty much like anything pale, crisp yellow, as my style. Now, this is going to be a short and shoddy episode, which, as I explained in a recent episode, is our style-focused series. We've actually done a couple of these in the past. The response from listeners was really good, so we plan to make it a more regular thing. Of course, it wouldn't be Brewlosophy if we didn't put a little sciencey spin on things. So in addition to going into depth about the style, we're also going to spend some time talking about our experiences brewing whatever style we're focusing on. In this episode, of course, it's Kölsch, using short and shoddy methods. I think it's going to be a good one. All right. We've got a couple of things coming up that I want to let everyone know about. First off, Hop Harvest in Yakima, Washington. We're going to be hanging out in Yakima, Washington from September 20th to the 23rd, and would love to meet up with anyone who might be around. We've got plans to sit down with YVH guys to record an episode of their podcast, The Late Edition. They've got plans to do the same with us, and of course, we're going to be visiting some of the rad breweries that are up in the Yakima area, Wandering Hop, Varietal, and Bale Breaker, to name a few. Hit me up if you're going to be in town, and if not, consider going to Yakima on October 4th to attend their Yakima Valley Hops Fresh Hop Party. It's sure to be a kick-ass time. And just a reminder to our Irish listeners or people in the UK, I'm going to be joining Shut Up About Barclay Perkins blogger Ron Pattinson at the 2019 BrewCon in Dublin on October 5th. I'm so excited to get a taste of the Irish homebrewing scene and would love to have a pint with anyone who might be around. Head over to nationalhomebrewclub.ie to learn more about BrewCon and register to attend. If you like what we're doing and you want to help us to keep doing it, become a patron of Brewlosophy by visiting patreon.com/Brewlosophy, where you can make a small monthly pledge and in return receive rewards like access to unpublished recipes, unique discounts at Yakima Valley Hops, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with someone in the brewing world. Coming up later this month is one of the foremost experts on hazy New England IPA, author of the New IPA, Scott Janisch, who you may have heard on last week's episode. Scott is a wealth of knowledge and just an all-around cool guy. It's going to be a great session. All past sessions are available on our private Facebook page, so you can go back and watch them whenever you like. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. Feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who have an array of amazing purpose-built stainless brewing products to improve your brew day. If you're looking for a high-quality pilot brewery, make sure to check out their new BH15 single-tier system. It is a beautiful rig that comes with a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Head over to brewershardware.com to see what they're all about, and make sure to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. All right, a couple weeks ago, we dropped our first experience episode, the topic of focus being cold side oxidation. In that show, I talked about a method that I've been using lately where I use CO2 created during fermentation to purge the very keg that the fermenting beer is eventually going to be racked into. I'm not sure I've been contacted about something that I've said as much as I have this, so I figured I'd address a couple of the most common comments that I got. Kate, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on this stuff as well. First off, what happens when all of the sanitizer is pushed out of the first keg and into the second? The essence of that question, and this is what I think people are asking, is when you do that, are you now pressurizing the first keg? Well, the CO2 going into the new or the empty keg that was just purged is going to end up going, it gets pushed out. It continues to flow through to that second keg. And I keep this little gas depressor on the gas post that allows air to escape that second keg. So it's sort of like a blow off bucket. But it's the second keg that you're blowing off of. Anyways, the only thing that happens is some bubbles from the star sand start to push out of that second keg. But the first keg is still getting CO2 pushed through it. So it is seriously getting fully purged of O2. This is a weird method. I think it's fairly novel. I'm not sure if anybody else out there was doing it, before. I'd never seen anybody doing it, at least. I think the concern was that I was going to start pressurizing that first keg and maybe build up the back pressure wouldn't allow or would in some way hinder fermentation, but that's just not happening. It's still 2 PSI or whatever that'll push through that keg and into the next one. So there's no buildup of pressure. That was a big concern that people were asking about. Another common question had to do with cold crashing when using this method. I only started doing this when I got the Spike Flex Plus fermenter. So I just disconnect both of the kegs and attach a tank of CO2 set to 1 PSI during the cold crash. If I was using a different type of vessel, a carboy or a brew bucket, something like that, my inclination would be to either skip cold crashing, as we discussed in that episode, so you're packaging your beer warm, or employ the use of something like a brewloon lock. But what you're going to do, if you've got this nice purged keg, you don't want to open up a vector for oxygen to come in. So I just disconnect them, keep it closed, and then leave it in the chamber during cold crash and all of that as a storage place. But I'm not cold crashing with that keg connected to the fermenter. I don't want to suck all of that CO2 back in. I want it to stay in the keg for before I rack that beer into there. So hopefully that clarifies some things. What are you doing to eliminate your cold side oxidation?
Yeah, I mean, I use brew buckets, so the SS Brewtech brew buckets, and I actually got their conversion package that puts a little 1.5 inch tri-clamp fitting on the top and a little elbow. So whenever I cold crash, I take the blow off tube off, put that elbow on, and then attach about 1 to 2 psi of CO2 to that, and then just hit the cold crash, and that keeps the pressure sort of right in the brew bucket. It also is nicely because then I just take everything out of the fermenter, or really just crank up the pressure just a little bit, and then compress straight from the brew bucket into the keg.
Yeah, that connector that you're talking about is really, really cool. I don't have one of those, so I kind of jury-rigged I used an old airlock that I jammed down into the hole in the top of the brew bucket, and it worked pretty well. The one thing that you have to keep in mind about the thing with the SS Brewtech brew bucket, they're awesome. It will only hold about 1 or 2 PSI of gas, so you might lose a little bit of gas during the cold crash, but it's not that much. It's only once it gets past that point of where it won't contain the amount of pressure. Anyways, I really do appreciate all the feedback, and hopefully that method helps people avoid wasting gas on purging kegs. I heard from a few people who are using like glass carboys to do that now, plastic carboys, the Spidell. I mean, you can make it work with any fermentation vessel, I think. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com. Leave us a voice message by calling 951-444-0320 or say something on social media. So I recently got an email from listener Alistair Dinning of Quebec, Canada, telling me about a farmhouse ale that he's brewed a few times now. He says his friends really like it, that the kegs don't last very long, and that he thinks it's best drunk fresh because the yeast plays a big part of the flavor profile. Well, when he offered to send me a couple bottles to share with my friends, who was I not to accept?
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Sniff test here. It smells pretty good.
I'm a man of the world.
Doesn't mean it's going to taste good. Does not smell like an IPA though.
No.
Which is good for me. Little cinnamon going on. Clovish.
Funky would be the word I would use.
Some spice. I don't know what it is.
It has got some spice.
It's kind of borderline juniper.
Oh, shut up.
It is.
Oh, you get confused? You go to your roots?
No.
We're back.
The roots of the bush.
We're full circle. Everything's juniper now. I mean, it's grown on me. I don't think it's
not bad.
As well, you say spicy. I do taste maybe a little bit of cinnamon. Good for you. Just whatever you say, I'm going to taste, so to speak.
I don't know. I have no idea what it is.
Well, that's obvious.
Yeah.
Let's not even try to do what it is. Let's just say if we like it or not. I don't know.
It's not bad. I could drink a few.
I mean, yeah.
It does not have any like lingering aftertaste.
Do you have to let it linger? I don't know. It's just kind of.
It's not bad.
It's not bad.
I'll just go with a 5 on the.
How about I'll go with a 5 too.
You know, for being such a characterful style of beer, farmhouse ale or saison, I was impressed that the guys liked it at all. I had sort of low expectations on this guy, so nice job, Alistair. Thank you so much for sending it in. I thought the beer was really well done. I've never really been a big fan of the saison farmhouse style. It's just not. I like the whole clean lager thing, and but I can certainly appreciate a good one. And I thought yours definitely was a good one. I'd probably go if I were allowed to give Jersey Tim's, I'd probably go somewhere in the 7 to 8 out of 10 range. If you would like your beer or any other fermented beverage reviewed by Jersey and Tim, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. All right, time to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about the delicious style known as Kölsch. So I've been hanging out with brewers and craft beer nerds for a long time now, and while we do occasionally have our differences, one thing it seems we all share is a love of learning and trying new things, as well as saving a couple of bucks. Well, right now, Craft Beer and Brewing is helping fans of Brewlosophy learn more while saving some coin by offering 20% off the price of a subscription to their awesome magazine. Chock full of brewing insights, tips, and recipes from industry experts, Craft Beer and Brewing is seriously great. I read every issue page to page myself. To get 20% off your subscription, all you have to do is sign up at beerandbrewing.com/brewlosophy.
Just as the Grainfather all-in-one brewing system revolutionized all grain brewing at home, the Grainfather conical fermenter and glycol chiller take this one step further by giving homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation, just like commercial breweries use. With a full array of features including insulated double-walled construction, an innovative dual-valve yeast dump and sampling tap, and an integrated heating element and temperature controller, the conical fermenter provides a professional quality fermenting environment for superior temperature control. With the ability to individually power and control the temperature of up to 4 Grainfather conical fermenters, each with their own fermenting schedule, the Grainfather Glycol Chiller is the perfect addition to ensure superior fermenting results. And for a limited time, you can save 10% on your order by going to grainfather.com and entering coupon code NZB during checkout. Once again, enter coupon code NZB when you order the Grainfather conical fermenter or Glycol Chiller at grainfather.com. Once again, that's grainfather.com.
Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the super fast counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. The first time I ever brewed a Kölsch was in late summer of 2011. My friend Chris and I had gotten into the habit of brewing 2 batches side by side every other week, and we were trying our hand at styles that were difficult to find on store shelves. The beer turned out fantastic. In fact, it ended up taking second place in a local BJCP competition. That was the point Kölsch solidified its place on my favorites list.
Oh yeah, man. I always have a Kölsch on tap here at the house. So what is a Kölsch? Kölsch Cat 5B. That's where we are in BJCP guide for anybody that's following along at home. From a high level, what we're looking for, a clean, crisp, delicately balanced beer, usually with a very subtle fruit and hop character. Easy enough, right? We could just finish the show there, couldn't we?
I know, exactly. And it's pale and it should be clear. And yeah, let's go grab a Kölsch and end the show. That sounds good.
All right, just kidding. So one of the reasons why I love Kölsch is because it's got such a cool history too.
Yes.
So Kölsch, of course, is brewed in Cologne, Germany, I think is actually how you say it.
I believe the Germans say Köln.
Oh, Köln. Oh, there you go.
I try.
Yeah, I'm not fancy enough, so I'm just going to use the bastardized English pronunciation, Cologne. Right. But yeah, so Cologne was brewing beer since the Middle Ages, like most other cities in Germany. And sometime, 1600s, there around, Munich and other German cities had started doing lagers, and they were becoming really, really popular. We've all had fest beers and Munich Dunkels and all that stuff. And the city of Cologne was actually getting a lot of competition for their locally brewed beers. Cologne had this history of top fermenting, so they're using ales instead of ale yeast instead of lagers. And it's actually kind of funny, when I was doing research in this, I didn't know this fact until today, but in 1603, the town council actually tried to force young brewers to swear an oath, and I quote, that you prepare your beer as of old, from good malt, good cereals, and good hops, well boiled, and that you pitch it with top yeast and by no means with bottom yeast.
God, only in Germany.
Yeah, it's like dun dun dun.
Awesome.
You used bottom yeast.
Yeah. Tisk. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So the idea there, it sounds like, though, the idea being we want to distinguish ourselves from all of these other, Pilsner and Helles making regions by making this delicious quaffable beer using ale yeast.
Yeah, exactly. So, these smart young brewers who ostensibly had just sworn this oath to never use bottom yeast, decided, okay, well, what if we use ale yeast? Let's use ale yeast. Let's ferment it at, slightly higher than lagering temperatures, but then let's let it lager and sit. And so they did, and they came up with what we call now the hybrid style of Kölsch. Which is also what their sister city was doing, Dusseldorf. So if you've got or have had an alt beer or enjoy that style, they kind of started doing the same thing. Both of them are actually pretty close to each other on the Rhine, so that's how they came up with this.
Yeah, well, and the thing between alt beer and Kölsch, or Dusseldorf and Köln, basically, or Cologne, is a fascinating interregional kind of beer war, basically, right? Like, you don't go into a Dusseldorf bar and order a Kölsch.
Yeah, exactly, or vice versa. Apparently,
or vice versa. Yeah, I had we have a family friends who live out in Dusseldorf, and their kid actually came out to Fresno for a what do they call that, like student exchange thing.
Yeah.
And stayed with my aunt here in town, so we saw him all the time. And he was 17 or 18, but now he's an adult, and they still come out every year, and they always bring me alt beer from Dusseldorf, and they know that I love Kölsch. So for them they're like extending the fun little beer war over here in Fresno. So whenever they come out, I always try to have a Kölsch on tap.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's fun.
I bet that's good though. Nice alt beer, fresh from the source. Oh man.
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So these days, though, Kölsch in the EU is actually a protected geographical indication.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an appellation. It has to be brewed within 50 kilometers or about 30 miles of Cologne, and it has to be brewed according to the Kölsch Convention, which was signed by the Kölsch Brewing Association in 1986. The Kölsch Convention basically just says exactly what the BJCP guidelines say, which is a light-colored, highly fermented, strongly hopped, bright, top fermented full beer, which is, again, pretty easy, pretty good. But what the Kölsch Convention also specifies is that you can only serve Kölsch beer in the Stange.
Yeah,
Yeah, the classic Kölsch glass, the 200 milliliter straight-sided Stange.
Probably one of my favorite glasses, but I think that is because I associate it with Kölsch, and I love Kölsch so much. But it's so interesting. I've never been to Cologne, but I know a lot of people who have. I plan on going there one day. But these glasses are, I think Stange means pole, right? That if you translated it to English, it's pole or something like that.
Yeah, pole, rod, stick. I think any of those things.
Yeah, it's just a straight just a straight glass, and they serve it smaller amounts. And maybe I'm wrong about this, but I was told that's because when you have a smaller amount, it doesn't get warm as fast.
Yeah. I mean, they're 200 milliliter glasses, or like 6 ounces for
Right.
us, imperial folks. But yeah, can you imagine if we went to a bar here in the United States and they just poured you a 6-ounce glass?
Oh yeah,
You know?
God, uprising, right? Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. But I can imagine, I've always heard stories about, there's just the serving staff over there's just got trays and trays of these things just walking around just virtually the whole time.
Yeah, and the indicator that you're ready for another one, I believe, is that you put your coaster on top of your glass, and that hey, bring me another one, right? Or
yeah.
Anyways,
Yeah, totally.
I think it's cool. I love German beer culture. Can you imagine if here in America, like for every style we had a convention? So there's like the brown ale convention, or that just to me speaks to how incredibly important this style of beer is to that culture, to that region.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, the Kölsch convention, it also has to be according to the German purity law, the Reinheitsgebot. So you've got all those sort of restrictions as well too, which kind of leads me into some of the ingredients that we do in Kölsch. What does a Kölsch look like? I could go through the vital statistics for the BJCP, but really, it's a standard strength beer, somewhere between 4.5 to 5%. Going to be fairly light color. I think BJCP has 3.5 to 5. So, you're looking at a nice yellow beer. And then, medium bitterness, 18 to 30 IBUs. But really what I think sets a good Kölsch apart is that malt character, that just very, very subtle, bread crust type of malt. There's really just... It's really hot here in Texas, in case people didn't know. Yesterday it was like 100 degrees, and sitting outside drinking that cool, refreshing, crisp, nice beer. Oh man, there's just nothing that's like that.
That to me is what. When Kölsch, Pilsner, Helles, they all have that same thirst quenching, just absolutely refreshing. One of the things I think that you hear, we hear a lot about Kölsch, and you know what I'm going to say, it has to do with fermentation character. Because it is fermented warmer, I think a lot of people are fermenting Kölsch at like 62, 63 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 15 or 16 degrees C, something like that. It's not that Kölsch is known for having a fruity ester or a fruity character to it. My thing is that I rarely detect that when I'm drinking a good Kölsch. To me, they are almost as clean as Pilsner, but the some of the hop character might be coming through as fruity, or maybe some of the malt character.
Yeah, exactly. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's exactly what I wanted to say too. I always see, especially whenever I'm judging in a competition or something like that, I'll see people they'll put like a Pils in there that they just, have some sort of fruity ester or something too. And they go, oh, here's a Kölsch. It does technically in BJCP guidelines say you can have a subtle fruity character derived from fermentation.
Right.
But in my experience, whenever I've tried that, it's very subtle. It's very subtle. You have to really sit there and look for it. We're not talking about just regular warm fermented ale esters.
Right.
In a pale ale or something like that. It really does have to be subtle. But some other good characteristics of a Kölsch are it's got a dry, somewhat vinous aftertaste, is what a lot of people say. I've heard some people describe it as like a white wine finish. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's where you really get away from that sort of estery description.
Right.
No, this beer is supposed to be crisp. It's supposed to be dry. It's supposed to be light, refreshing. So, stay away and avoid the esters if you can. It's just, to me, not what makes a good Kölsch.
No, and you look at now I have a bias here. There are plenty of Kölsch strains out there. I think probably 3 popular ones that are kind of hot right now. My favorite is the one that's sourced from PJ Frö, which is Dieter, Imperial Yeast Dieter. It's WLP 029 from White Labs. I do not believe Y Yeast has a PJ Fra strain. But then they do, Wyeast has another, their Kölsch strain that is known for producing a little bit more ester character. In fact, I've heard some people say they get a little bit of that isoamyl acetate, that banana thing from it. I've never used it. I don't want that in my Kölsch as much as appropriate as it might be or whatever. But what it makes me think of is this idea that, at the time when Kölsch was sort of being created, developed, right? The other big type of beer that was popular in Germany was Hefeweizen, or these, really ester-driven, phenolic-driven, wheat beers.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, people were drinking whites or weisses and stuff,
Yeah.
and these pale beers and wheat beers, which actually too. My recipe for Kölsch, I know this probably violates the Reinheitsgebot, but my recipe from Kölsch has about 5% of red wheat in it.
I think that's pretty common, right? Because it's I see a lot of Kölsch recipes that are basically I don't mean to diss Kölsch. I get that it's a very regionally important style. It's basically Pilsner with a little bit of wheat in it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, mine's like 95% pills with 5% wheat. But even in the BJCP style guidelines, they allow for up to 20% wheat in a Kölsch. I've never put 20% in it. I'd be a little bit, I would worry a little bit about putting that much wheat in a Kölsch. You might get some clarity issues or some other sort of flavors there that you're not really looking for. But I absolutely. So I've brewed this beer with straight Pils malt. I've brewed it with Pils and a little bit of, Cara Munich or a little bit of Cara Foam or something like that, or a little even Cara Pils. But whenever I put that 5% of red wheat in, and that's when it really kicked up that taste on the Kölsch that I was really looking for.
That's really it's really interesting to me, this idea, and this goes for more than just Kölsch, but this concept of getting more than just your I guess expected, quote unquote malt character from certain malts. You expect that bread crust. You expect to have that almost malty sweetness thing. But I've used malts, one of them being Mecca grade estate malts. I believe it's Pelton is their Pilsner style, that have that very just in the finish, kind of a white grape skin or white wine type of finish that works incredibly well for this style. Where it's sort of expected that you have a little bit of a fruity finish. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Another thing that I do, or that I've done in the past, I've actually used up to 15%, I believe is the max I've gone in Kölsch of red wheat, or whatever wheat malt I've got on hand. Another thing that I see a lot of people doing is just splashing in a little bit of just standard Munich light malt, like a Munich 10 or whatever.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. That would probably be great. A nice little base Munich 10 malt to throw in there, give it a little bit of color and a little bit of extra flavor. Exactly.
Kind of add that graham crackery thing to just boost up a little bit of that, just that malt character. Is that, I don't know the recipes for any of these classic commercial, Kölsches out there, but I would think that, that some of the commercial places brewing really good Kölsch in Germany have no issues tossing in just a little bit of like Munich malt or even Vienna malt, something like that.
Yeah, I would think so. In doing research for the podcast, looking around to see if I could find any of those stuff, I couldn't really find. Of course, they're not posting their recipes online anywhere,
right?
But one of the things they talked about is there's a lot of variation in Kölsch, even in Cologne, just in that area that are subject to that geographical indication that they've got. And I was sitting there thinking, I was like, oh yeah, there's actually quite a bit of stuff you could do. When you see that description, pale, light colored, crisp, very subtle, slight hop character, you're thinking, well, there's not really a whole lot I can do, but they really do. It seems like there's use of Munich. It seems like that there's, a use of Pils malt, even some people, I think, using some different types of, probably not in Cologne, but in, commercial breweries here in the US using two-row, just straight two-row.
Right. To kind of bump up more of that toasty thing, right? I've heard of that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, in the U.S., nobody's calling it a Kölsch. Most people are actually appropriately branding it as a Kölsch style beer,
right? Or just call it a Blondale. I've seen that as well. We made a Kölsch, but we're calling it a Blondale. We don't want to offend anybody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's amazing how similar they are. The Blondales and the Kölsch. to me, that Kölsch has got just a little bit nicer of that bread crust. And of course, I mean, you can't talk about a Kölsch, a German beer, without noble hops.
That was going to be the point I was going to make. Most blonde ale probably hopped less than a Kölsch, and also using, Cascade or Centennial or whatever. Whereas Kölsch really is, to me, it puts on display all of the wonderfulness of German lager beer, but in a very unique non-lager style. Now, I think traditionally the idea with Kölsch, correct me if I'm wrong, Cade, the idea is, we're fermenting it with a top fermenting ale yeast, maybe a little bit cooler than your typical 20°C or 68 degrees Fahrenheit, but still it's warmer than you would ferment a Pilsner. But they do, again, my understanding here, they do put it through a lagering phase. So they do lower the temperature and let it lager for a while until it's bright.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, the lagering phase of that's really, really important. And even anecdotally, I've made a lot of Kölsches. I like I said, being my favorite style, you can imagine that I've made quite a few.
Right.
But I've really, really noticed that, sitting that beer, letting it just condition for a month or 2 months, for me, at least on my system, really results in this beautifully clear beer. Everything comes through, the hops, the noble hop character comes through, that bread crust flavor, the cream, the clean vinous finish. It really helps. And I don't know, maybe it's something specific to the yeast. I'd have to actually look into it and see. But that's what I really, really. One of my big things for Kölsch is let it sit and let it wait. I know most brewers aren't going to want to hear that because they like to drink their beer now.
I know. Who do you think you're talking to here, man? I'm the most impatient brewer on earth.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why, I was fascinated. I mean, I know we'll get to this later with the short and shoddy results, but I was fascinated to see, how that actually changed. It was funny. I think we were on the Brew Crew chat, maybe a month back or so. And Ray had sent over a picture of a young Kölsch or whatever, and he's like, "Oh man, this beer just hasn't cleared up yet."
Yeah.
And then I sent over a beer of the same yeast of mine that had been sitting in the keg for about 45 days or so, and it was, you could read a book through it. How clear it was.
I want to try that beer so bad, Cade.
Yeah, maybe next time I'm in California, we'll drop by.
Hell yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about your typical brewing process. I think for the most part, and brewing a Kölsch isn't that much different than brewing, any other beer on the home brewing level. But let's go through some stuff, maybe like preferred water chemistry, stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. So, it's definitely a warm ferment beer, so 60 to 65 F is generally where they're fermenting. I mean, it's an ale, so maybe a little bit lower than normal ale temperatures, but still quite a bit higher than a lager temperature range, 45 to 55, that kind of area.
Yeah.
Grist, like we said, we talk about is usually mostly pills with a little bit maybe of red wheat or Munich or something like that. Noble hops, I think my recipe's got, an ounce, I think at 60, and then maybe just a little bit more as we go through.
Is that something that you are, there's a lot of people, particularly in the homebrew world, but I'm sure this happens on the commercial scale as well, where to save on money, basically, they'll use like a high alpha Magnum or something like that at 60, or even Horizon or something like that, and then start layering in their noble hops later on in the boil because they are low alpha, so you can reduce the amount of vegetal matter in your beer, all that stuff. I don't do that when I'm making Kölsch or when I'm making Pilsner. Those are the two main ones. I just go with it, and I toss in as much. However much I need to hit my expected IBU at 60 minutes, or I do a first wort hop actually, but that's typically my approach because I feel like, and maybe we should experiment with this a little bit, but I feel like you do get a certain characteristic when you add a big charge of 3% alpha Tettninger or whatever at 60 minutes. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, for sure. I was looking back at my most recent recipe, which I think is like the 10th iteration that I've done of this recipe. But the change from this one was doing a charge of a small charge at the end. So in this one I used Tettnang, an ounce of Tettnang at 60 minutes, and then I put a little bit of Liberty, about a half an ounce at 5 minutes to get just sort of some of that noble hop aroma. But I'm just like you. I'm using the German Noble for the full 60. Be interested to see one done with like a Magnum or something like that, just to get the bitterness up.
Yeah, I'm sure I've done it in the same way. Magnum is a German. It's not, technically a part of the four noble hops, but it is German. It has a lot of those same characteristics. So I don't think it would be bad. I just feel like there's a certain, here comes our feelings in on, science doesn't care about your feelings, of course, but I just feel like there's something that you get from adding a big charge of a low alpha noble at 60 as opposed to a small charge of a high alpha, whatever, so, but again, I'm sure I've done it before and I just don't remember it, but I don't doubt a beer like that would turn out well. It's just something I was curious about.
Yeah, I mean, it's German style, German hop beers. I kind of like to. I'm not a huge style guy. I mean, I like brewing to style. I'm a BJCP judge and Cicerone, so I like brewing beers that come out the way that they're supposed to.
Right.
A German style. Magnum is, Liberty's. What I call second tier German, I guess. German roots. But yeah, I mean, the German hops is what we're going for in that. So I really want a German hop flavor to come through.
Yeah, I agree.
But you mentioned water profile earlier. And that was another thing I wanted to talk about too with Kölsch today. So two things that I changed that really upped what I perceive my Kölsch was adding that red wheat addition about 5% and then water profile. I can't actually remember where I read this, and I've spent a lot of time trying to Google and find it. But somewhere, it may have just been an offhand comment on another podcast or something like that. I can't remember. But I read that the Rhine River has sort of a hard water profile that was high in sulfates. And, up to let's say the last 2 or 3 iterations of this beer, I was just using, Martin Brewing Guard's yellow balanced profile.
Right.
Something with a regular, normal malt profile, normal hop profile, and a medium bitterness always seemed to me like, well, okay, yellow balanced.
Yeah.
But I read that somewhere and then I changed it. So I changed my water profile when I'm brewing a Kölsch to a 2-to-1 sulfate to chloride ratio. So I'm, up over 100 sulfates and around 50 chlorides. And that really kicked up my Kölsch.
I do the same exact thing, man. I couldn't agree more that Kölsch to me, to get that crispness, to have higher sulfate over chloride, hands down. I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, it felt like it got rid of the sweetness that I was tasting. And there is some residual sweetness to a Kölsch. I mean, you got a nice bit of malt in there and it's balanced. You're not over bittering, so it is going to be, there is some residual sweetness, but that dry, crisp, vinous character, once I kicked that sulfate up, that's really what brought my Kölsch up for me.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. In terms of mashing, your typical 60-minute mash, right? I mean, nothing special there. There are people who will say do everything you can to avoid hot side aeration with such a delicate style if that's something you're concerned about.
All the Lodo guys, Jake's probably going to roll over in his grave if I talked about how little attention I paid to oxidation in some of my first iterations of this beer, but
that turned out good, right?
That turned out great.
And then again, just moving on to the boil, another typical 60 to 90 minutes. I think traditionally, and I know brewers are kind of moving away from this, but if you're using mostly Pilsner malt, you'll see the recommendation for 90-minute boils to really drive off that SMM or to reduce DMS in the beer or the risk of DMS. Anything, I mean, then you move into the unique aspects of fermentation and what temperatures you're going to choose to ferment at. When I'm making Kölsch, if I'm making a beer just for me to drink and it's Kölsch, and I'm always, my favorite yeast is for Kölsch, and actually I use this yeast for pale ale and I love it as well, is Imperial yeast. I think it's GO3 Dieter.
Oh, I love that yeast.
It is so good. It's so good. It's super clean. That's the thing about it. But if it's good enough for PJ Frew, it's good enough for me is how I look at it. And I usually ferment it at about 19 degrees C or 66 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, I'm actually probably a little bit lower than that when I'm doing, but like 62, 63, not a huge difference.
I think that's probably more typical and it's certainly more in line with what I think you're going to find over in Cologne, right? Is that it's an ale yeast, but it's cool fermented and then it's lagered. That's kind of what makes this style unique.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm always amazed at that Dieter strain. That it seems like, especially if you give it some time, time is money, I know, but if you give it some time and just let it sit, I'm blown away with how clear that beer gets after a month or two of sitting in the keg.
Yeah, and I believe Imperial talks about how that strain is known for being pretty flocculent and dropping out pretty quickly. I've always had a good experience with it, particularly like you said, if you let a beer that's whatever beer it is, fermented with that Dieter strain, and you let it lager or cold condition, whatever you want to call it, for 2 weeks, you're pretty much going to have a nice bright beer. So, other than that, once you're done fermenting, you can package, lager for a little bit, beer's ready to drink. What do you like to carbonate? Is there a specific level of carbonation you prefer in Kölsch?
Yeah, so I like my beers a little bit, American carbonated. I'll say. So yeah, I'm usually just around 2.5. My kegging setup, or at least my kegerator setup, I've got a little 3-way splitter that I run 3 kegs out of my kegerator on.
Yeah.
So I usually just keep them all at the same level. So I'll usually have a pale ale and a Kölsch, and then something else interesting on that I want. So.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I like my beer carbonated. I like bubbles. That's part of what makes it fun for me. And so I'll usually, I think volume wise, I'm at like 2.4 volumes or something like that.
Yeah, 2.4, 2.5, something right in there.
Nice and spritzy. Again, it really does kind of you work towards creating that impression of just a refreshing, really easy drinking, delicious beer. And naturally, as one of my favorite styles, I've brewed Kölsch many times, mostly using fairly standard methods. How would one turn out if I cut a bunch of corners in the brewing process? That's exactly what we're going to be talking about when we return from this break. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer, and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. When dumping wort-soaked grain in leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, do you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge, and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order. Being a style that's pretty closely related to Pilsner and other pale German lagers, it's no surprise that brewers of Kölsch tend to abide by some pretty stringent methods. heathen that I am, I wanted to see how a Kölsch brewed short and shoddy style would turn out. Now, I love brewing these short and shoddy beers. For those who aren't necessarily aware of what this short and shoddy thing is, basically we take a standard brewing approach, throw it up in the air, kick it around a little bit, and let it fall and see what happens with the beer in the end. I actually started my first like short and shoddy batch. I was really bored one day. My wife had just taken my oldest kid out to go shopping, school shopping or something. So I went out in the garage and wanted to see if I could finish a little small batch of beer in like an hour's time. And so that kind of opened up the door for me because the beer came out really good in the end, surprised the hell out of me. And so it opened up the door. We have this whole series now, and we're basically just going through the BJCP guidelines. So it's been a lot of fun. So for this Kölsch, what I did, the method that I used was a full volume brew in a bag. Now, there's nothing crazy about that method. There were people back in the day, maybe 8-9 years ago, who were saying, well, you can't get a real good beer if you're using brew in a bag. Bullshit. It works just fine. That's what I do. Full volume, so no sparge, nothing like that. So for in preparation for this brew day, I collected the full volume of filtered water the night before. I didn't make any adjustments to it. So my water here in Fresno is really, really simple and clean. I believe it's got about 6 ppm of sulfate naturally, and it might be like 9 or 10 ppm of chloride. So it was a little bit more chloride heavy than sulfate heavy. And I just left it alone because, we're going shoddy with this. I let that water sit in the kettle overnight. I also milled the grains the night before and let those just sit out in the garage. Again, that's something I normally do anyways. I'm not sure it has any impact, but all right, as far as the recipe, I went 90% Mecca grade Pelton Pilsner malt. So this was a Pilsner style malt, and 10% Mecca grades Metolius, which is their Munich style malt. This is a very interesting Munich malt, though. It's got a much, in my experience at least, it's got a really strong graham cracker flavor going on, and which is, I think, absolutely fantastic. Also adds just a touch of color to the beer. I didn't use any wheat malt, Cade. Did I break a rule?
Well, yeah, I don't know if you broke a rule, but I didn't taste your beer. We'll have to see.
Yeah, the beer got a single hop edition, and it was 2 different hops that I blended. This is what we were talking about a little bit before. I used just a whisper of Horizon, so that I didn't have to overdo the Tettnang. And the only reason I did that was because this beer this wort basically wasn't going to get a typical 60 to 90 minute boil. I only boiled it for 20 minutes. And so it got Tettnang and Horizon at the 20-minute mark. As soon as I removed the bag, I threw this big charge of hops in there and let them sit in throughout the 20-minute boil. Now, the mash only went on for 20 minutes as well. So far, we're 40 minutes into my brew day, and I'm already done with the boil. So that's kind of nice, right?
That's my favorite thing about short and shoddy. You can be done with the boil, done with your whole brew day in like 2.5 hours.
Right.
And actually, this was one, so like I said, I love Kölsch. This was one, whenever this experiment came out, I was actually going to brew a Kölsch that weekend, and I saw the results for this come out, and I'm not going to spoil the results, but I saw you do a 20-minute mash on this, and I was like, no way. You can't do a Kölsch with a 20-minute mash. That's crap, Marshall. You're leading everybody along. You can't do it. It's not going to come out. And I did it myself that weekend. I'll share later what my results were. But
the reduced mash thing and the reduced boil thing really gets people going, which I just think is so funny. We will get to the results in a minute. I chilled the wort down to wherever I could get it to, which at this time of year was something like 74 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 22C, something like that. Or 23C is what I've got in my notes here. And then I immediately racked. I didn't let the wort settle. I didn't, no letting the trub settle out into the kettle. I just racked that hazy wort right into a fermentation vessel and pitched the yeast. So I pitched the yeast at 74F23C, moved the fermentation vessel into a chamber. And that chamber was controlled to 68F. If I didn't do that during this time of year, it would have gotten to like 105 degrees. My garage gets pretty warm. So I did control it to 68F, not too difficult. And that's 20C. So the OG of the wort was 1050, which is exactly what I planned. But but it was 1050 because I knocked my expected brewhouse efficiency down to what I've learned my short and shoddy process gets, which is 62% efficiency.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question about that too. So when you adjust that efficiency level, how much are you taking a hit on by doing just like a 20 or 30 minute mash?
Yeah, that's a good question. And what I've determined is that it is that reduced mash rest is why my efficiency is going down. When I do a 20-minute mash, I go from about 73% efficiency down to between 60 to 62% efficiency. I've done a 15-minute mash and it knocked me down to about 56% efficiency.
Oh, wow.
My short and shoddy approach nowadays, and the thing is, people are like, well, that's obviously bad. Give me a reason other than the fact that you have to use a little bit more grain that it's bad, and I'll buy it. But
well, yeah, exactly. We shouldn't even spend much time talking about efficiency because it's so much just like, the extra 30 cents for malt that you had to put in there.
Exactly. Now I have heard an argument. It was all based on presumption. There was no like hard science behind it, but that the extra conversion that you get from a longer mash does have an impact on flavor. I have not been able to taste that difference. But if it does, it does. And I'm willing to accept that. So my new approach for short and shoddy, just as an update, is that I mash for 25 minutes. This one was mashed for 20. I got 62% efficiency. When I mash for that extra 5 minutes, I get somewhere up in the range of 68 to 70, which I'm perfectly happy with. So this beer was left for about a week to ferment. All I did is I pitched a pouch of Dieter directly into I didn't, no vitality starter. I didn't prop it up in a starter or anything like that. Yeah,
no starters for the wins with those Imperial pitch right pouches.
I know. God, they're awesome. Yeah. So let it ferment by itself for about a week, took hydrometer measurements when it looked like airlock activity was dying down, and noticed that the beer had already dropped to 1009 FG. It was also starting to clear up. So I figured, hey, it's probably done. So I think it was 8 or 9 days from pitch that I started cold crashing. I filled up a balloon, which we call the balloon lock, with some CO2 from a tank. Put that on the old fermenter and knocked the temperature in the chamber down to 0 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees F, and let it sit for about 36 hours. And then I added gelatin because powdered time is better than real time sometimes, in my opinion. I let it sit for another day or so with that gelatin and hoping that it's going to drop all of the particulate out. Which is exactly what it did, and then moved on to kegging the nice cold beer. That keg got placed in my keezer and hit with 45 psi of gas for 15 hours. I then reduced the gas. I purged the keg, reduced the gas to serving pressure, which I like to keep it around 12 or 13 psi, and let it sit for 4 days before serving it to tasters. So it was not lagered like you would typically expect, and it was burst carbonated as well. So
yeah, that's the part that I was like, wait, you served this after 4 days?
Yep.
And no difference, or we'll see if there is a difference in flavor or anything. That one was also blew my mind a little bit on this. So
well, and part of the short and shoddy thing is if a beer isn't typically like, we have a thing. There's a lot of beers out there, IPA for one. You want to drink it as fresh as possible. So I might, to make it more shoddy, I might age an IPA for a month before I serve it. Because what we're trying to do is test out, doing things kind of the quote unquote wrong way. And so with this one, I did not want to lager it, but Ray calls gelatin powdered time. I'll occasionally refer to it as powdered lagering because it's the same thing. And this beer, you can go check out the photo in the article. It was crystal clear, perfect color, fluffy, nice, creamy foam on the top of it. I absolutely loved it. Now, the one other shoddy thing I did was I didn't serve it in Stange glasses. So,
oh yeah, then it's just not a Kölsch. You just did it wrong. Throw out the results.
Yeah, again, Blondale, right? It's a Blondale with noble hops. Yeah.
No, but that picture in that article, oh man, that looks so good. I want to run out to my kegerator right now and grab a little hit of mine. Kölsch.
Yeah. Well, and it was. So my personal impressions of this beer, the notes that I took, it was absolutely delicious. I got the malt character was bread crust, slight hint of sweet hay that really melded wonderfully with those floral kind of slightly spicy characteristics from the Tettnanger hops. Dieter yeast is super, super clean in my experience. So I didn't detect any fruity esters, which I'm perfectly okay with. But I did pick up a little bit of that kind of Malcolm's description of it, I think, is best, which is the skin of a white grape or a green grape. There's just a hint of that in the finish, which to me really, really like brings out a unique kind of Kölsch character. That's what I expect from it. I don't know if that's something that I'm getting from the yeast, if it was something from the malt, if it was just a product of all of those things working together. But this beer, in my opinion, was pretty goddamn fantastic.
As Kölsches are usually. I love this. It looks great. I'm ready to see what the results are.
All right, so I served this beer to blind tasters. Now, when we served this short and shoddy survey, it's still sort of a work in progress. One of the first questions is basically, what style of beer do you think this is? Now, put yourself in the shoes of somebody who served a pale, fizzy, yellow beer, right? And you put it in front of them, and they drink it, and it's clean with maybe a little bit of hint of fruitiness in the finish. Otherwise, malt forward, a little bit of hops. It is not easy to identify styles. I'm telling you that. Blind style identification, as a BJCP judge and Cicerone, Cade, I think you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, man, absolutely. You put a beer down, and it's so hard to pick exactly what style this beer should go into. It takes forever. And yeah. I love looking at the results. I love the creativity of some of these people with what they picked on here. It's just fantastic.
Yeah. Well, some people, you could be a home brewer for 10 years and never pick up the BJCP guidelines. I mean, let's be real. Some people just don't understand the intricate aspects of styles out there. So that said, the first question had to do with style identification, which again is inherently difficult. Yet 3 people identified the beer as being a Kölsch. That blew my mind. I wasn't expecting anybody to get it. And then 9 more selected some form of a pale lager. So I think there were a few that said it was an American premium or something like that. Another person thought that it was a cream ale. One person put that it was a Vienna lager, which doesn't surprise me because if you use a 100% Vienna malt, you're going to get that same color. It's going to have some similar characteristics. So I'd say that was pretty doggone good.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the results, like looking through here, you got 2 people at Munich Helles, 3 at Kölsch, and then there's Vienna Lager, German light beer, Pale Keller beer, all
right.
Those, light German beers. That's exactly what you were going for, and that's what a lot of the participants identified.
Yep. So I was happy with that. I felt like it was, good. We're off to a good start right here. The fact 3 people picked Kölsch, and maybe those were people who were really keen on what that style, what to expect of that style. So that was pretty cool. The next question has to do with rating different characteristics, just the 3 main ones. So hops, malt, and the yeast character. So in terms of how hoppy, malty, and dry the beer was, tasters did seem to think it was fairly well attenuated. So that was the highest ranking, slightly more malty than hoppy. Makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, perfectly. Sounds like a great Kölsch.
Yeah. So far it's sounding like a pretty good Kölsch, but here comes no, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to. In terms of breaking down characteristics, so in terms of hop character, in order of highest to lowest rank, you've got earthy hop character. Next was melon, fruity, spicy, pine, and floral all got a tie. Again, it's using noble hops. This is exactly what I get from Tettniger. The melon kind of throws me for a little bit of a loop, but it's really hard sometimes to parse out what is hop character, what's character from the malt, what's coming from the yeast. So I would say that, earthy, melon, fruity, and then spicy, not too shabby in terms of nailing the hop character of these beers.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the earthy one was what kind of threw me off a little bit, because when I think of a Tettning, I don't normally think of earthy as the flavor, but you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, distinguishing hop characteristics from fermentation characteristics or malt-derived characteristics is so difficult.
Yeah.
But all those together, earthy, spicy, floral, melon, yeah, you're right in the wheelhouse of German noble hop.
Exactly. Well, and also, you consider the whatever unique impact a grain like Pelton, that's a Mecca grade. That is not a traditional European Pilsner malt, right? This is a craft maltster's malt that is going, naturally going to be unique. So maybe a little bit of that was coming through as well. In terms of malt character, you had 12 out of 19 tasters rate cracker and bread crust as being the highest I'd say that's a win as well.
Yeah, definitely.
That's that's what I would have rated it if I did the survey. It was really crackery, just really nice. Just that edge of the of nice piece of white bread. Really, really nice there. The next closest was 3 out of 19 people put caramel or sweet. I didn't get that at all, but I guess I could understand. And then 2 out of 19 people thought it was toasty. In terms of yeast character, 13 out of 19 people put clean. 4 out of 19 people thought it had a little bit more esters than it was clean. And then one person each said that they detected a sulfur or like a wild yeast type of thing. We got to have outliers in every
Yeah. I always wonder whenever I see results like that are wild yeast or something. Maybe it was the dryness, the dryness compared with some sort of hop that they were tasting, and they just thought, oh, maybe there is something a little twangy about it.
Or fat fingers. It's one of the others.
Yeah, could be that too.
Only one person reported perceiving an off flavor, and that off flavor was acetaldehyde. I'll be honest, that doesn't surprise me. With how dry this beer was and that slight kind of whiny thing in the finish, you could kind of see somebody who's really focusing on off flavors maybe picking out that acetaldehyde was present. I don't think it was, but
yeah, maybe that's the same person that picked the wild. Who knows?
Yeah, probably. They must have just had a bad glass. That's what it was. All right, so here's the good stuff, the stuff people look for. Preference ratings. So basically what happens is before we reveal the style of beer to people, we ask them to rate how much they like it. So again, this is blind preference. So you still don't know what you're drinking. You're just saying whether or not you like it. So it's not relative to a style. I like to get that out there. 4 of the 19 people rated a 5 out of 5. They thought it was that good. We never see this. So this beer had a lot going on for it. Another 8 people rated it 4 out of 5. So again, what's that? 12 of 19 tasters are thinking that this is just, regardless of what style it is, just a really well-made, tasty beer. You don't expect that when you do a 20-minute mash and a 20-minute boil and you pitch warm and you ferment,
Yeah, no, absolutely right. I'm always blown away with the tasting ratings. And this one actually from the Short and Shoddy, I don't have any of the results in front of me for the other stuff. But, a 4 and a 5 on a Short and Shoddy beer in terms of just overall how much the participants liked it.
Yeah.
That's pretty damn good.
And that's really good. And the thing is, they don't know that it's a Short and Shoddy brewed beer. We don't ever tell them that.
Yeah.
The lowest rating was a 2 out of 5. Again, this is a subjective preference question. And still, one person, it's a 2 out of 5. When the lowest rating can be a 0, 2 is the middle. 2 means like, yeah, I'd drink this if I had to, right? That's not bad. I mean, that's my opinion on it, at least.
Yeah.
Then what we do after we ask them to rate their preference on the beer, we reveal what style it is, and then ask them to rate on a scale of 0 to 5 how closely the beer, still not knowing that it was Short and Shoddy, right? How closely it represents the style as they know it. Okay. So again, this is sort of relative to what they know of the style. 3 felt it was smack on. So 5 out of 5. They thought this is a perfect representation of Kölsch. That stroked my ego just a little bit, I'll admit.
It's always nice to have confirmation.
Yeah, right. I mean, I liked it a lot too. 9 people rated a 4 out of 5 in terms of how well it represents the style. So right there, again, we've got what is that? 12 people who are rating it 4 or 5 out of 5 in terms of how closely it resembles a classic example of the style. That's pretty doggone good. Another 5 rated it as a 3 out of 5, and then 2 rated it as a 2 out of 5. Nobody rated a 0. And so again, I'm at this point, I'm thinking, goodness, we have made this beer in what ultimately was less than 2 hours brew day. I think it was an hour and 20 minutes or so, and it came out surprisingly good.
Yeah, I mean, you violated almost all of the traditional Kölsch rules,
Yeah.
and still came out with a beer that is actually highly representative of the style.
Yeah,
Again, like I said, like I saw these results that weekend before I had to brew a Kölsch. And I saw this and I said, no, there's no way. Like, I know I let my Kölsch's cold lager. I determined that if I actually did an anecdotal just experience with me where I brewed a Kölsch and then let it sit for like 30 days and then brewed another Kölsch right behind it. and tried that one after it was sitting on for 15 days versus the one that had been sitting on for 45 days.
Nice.
And I liked the one that had sat longer. So I'm thinking, okay, 20-minute mash. There's no way that you get actually Kölsch flavor from a 20-minute mash. and then you actually just put this thing in the keg. I think it was you served it to participants like 4 or 5 days.
4 days later, yeah. And it was crystal clear. It was crystal clear because of the gelatin, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I tried the same thing that next weekend. I was like, all right, screw it. I'm just going to do it. I did not adjust my recipe for the efficiency hit.
So you had a nice sessionable, even more sessionable Kölsch, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So but it was amazing. It still came out as it's just nicely sessionable Kölsch. It was like 4.2 or something. So I think that those people who hit that American standard lager above, who identified that as the style, or just American lager,
right?
I can certainly see how maybe a certain Shoddy Kölsch is getting over into that territory, but nevertheless, totally crushable, totally drinkable, great beer.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get to some reader comments on this short and shoddy experience, I just wanted to say that there are other things that I have done with Kölsch style. Yeah, I put that in air quotes because, again, we don't live in Cologne and it's not technically a Kölsch if it's brewed in my garage. But one of the things that I've done quite a bit, actually, is I will warm ferment a Kölsch with lager yeast. Now, here's the thing. All I'm doing is using my Kölsch recipe. But like I said earlier, to me, a Kölsch recipe is really not that much different than a Pilsner recipe. So and this is my line of thinking, if I ferment with a lager yeast, regardless of whether it's cool or warm, does that make it more closely resemble a Kölsch? Or is it still a Pilsner because people can't usually tell apart a warm fermented from a cool fermented Pilsner?
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Deep thoughts.
Deep thoughts. That's what he's brewlosophizing on the Brewlosophy podcast.
Imagine that, right?
Yeah.
So we did get a bunch of comments on this. Again, I am absolutely a fan of this method, and so anyone out there who's looking to shave off some time on their brew day, I would recommend upping that mash time just by 5 minutes. You will get more conversion, which just, I don't know, that kind of makes me a little bit happier. But, if you're between 60 and 70% and you're brewing in an hour and a half all grain, that's pretty dope. So, all right. First comment comes from Corey White. He said, very interesting that even though you hit a higher mash temp, your FG was still under your predicted. Looking back over the last few short and shoddy brew sessions, it appears you're usually hitting lower FGs. I wonder if the abbreviated mash extracts more of the highly fermentable sugars and or less of the less fermentable ones.
Interesting comment there, Corey. Not sure. And, from whenever I first look at this, that if the higher temperature higher mash temp, the only thing I'll say about this is the Brewlosophy experiments that they've done regarding mash temperature, at least if I remember correctly, have all come back pretty non-significant, that mash temp's not doing a whole lot in terms of, the experiments that we've done, at least limited under our variables and circumstances. So, my answer to this is, could it affect or cause this? Yes. Is it likely? I don't know. What do you think, Marshall?
Everything you said is what I'll say. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this when we were talking about the short and shoddy recipe and brew day, but I don't usually mash my Kölsch that high. That was an accident, but that's a part of the process. I had overshot my strike temperature, and so rather than waiting for the water to cool off, I just mashed in and went with it, right? That lower FG, I don't know if that has anything to do with the mash temp. I've found that I get really good conversion with Mecca Great Estate malts. And that they, regardless of mash temp, they still attenuate really well. Now, I say regardless, I'm talking about within a nice range. If I'm 1 to 2 F off or half of a degree Celsius off, I haven't really noticed much of a difference. I do think that Dieter is highly attenuative, though. So it's why I mentioned earlier, I love using that strain for things like pale ale and IPA. You get a really nice crisp hop character out of it as well. So could be the mash temp. I really don't know, Corey, but appreciate the comment. Another one comes from Doug S. He says, recently I made a similar batch, simple grain bill like yours, but used Hallertau for bittering, first wort hop, and Hallertau Blanc and lemon drop as flavor and aroma. 40-minute mash and 30-minute vigorous boil. Grain to glass was 10 days. Took it to a party and left with an empty keg. I am really enjoying the beers from these short and shoddy brew days.
Oh man, I love that story. Grain to glass, 10 days, took it to a party, and there's nothing better than leaving a party with an empty keg.
Oh, I know. Unless the beer was so good that you wish you still had some left, but
Yeah,
just make another batch. It's only going to take you an hour and a half.
Exactly. Just a reason to brew again this next weekend.
Yeah, I've actually heard. I like to include comments like this sometimes because I think some people are still so skittish when it comes to changing up this very traditional brewing process that we've all adopted. People do it. I know. I hear from people all the time who only brew using abbreviated methods, or what we call short and shoddy. So it does work. Another comment comes from Reddit user Will Fisher. He says, "I love it. I also do a short and shoddy Kölsch, similar except using no chill, which works very well. Have you considered using no chill methods in your short and shoddy brews? Not having to chill is a great time saver for me." Kate, have you ever done a no chill thing that you rack it to a cube and let it sit overnight?
I have never done what I think most people would refer to as like a formal no chill process, where you're racking it to I think it was New Zealand and Australia that's kind of popularized it, but racking to a cube and then leaving virtually no headspace in the cube and then just letting it chill overnight in that sanitized environment.
Right.
I've never done that, but I have actually just racked to a fermenter and then just straight from boil, just straight into stainless steel fermenter and then drop it in there to let it cool.
And you're not dead of botulism? That's
I am not dead of botulism. I would not recommend that anyone do that for themselves. So just putting that disclaimer out there. That's probably one of those practices that I would be a little bit worried about telling people. But I have done that before.
So I used to have a no-chill cube that a homebrewing buddy of mine let me borrow, and I just forgot to give back to him, and then I let somebody else borrow it, and I no longer have it. My issue with no-chill is, again, I think it's awesome. I think if it works for you, it works for you. I just want to pitch the yeast and get going. So to me, it's easier just to throw a chiller in there, waste a couple gallons of water. I know that's horrible, but and then pitch my yeast immediately. So that's why I do that. Will maybe one day we'll do a no chill short and shoddy batch. But like I said, if it's working for you, keep doing it. Reddit user, Thrylomitsos. He says, excellent. Have you used Kölsch yeast to make more traditional ales? For example, higher fermentation temperatures. Reason I ask is I had my fermenting fridge die out on me just a few days into a batch of Kölsch fermentation. I was about to throw out the beer, but decided to let it ride at the warmer ambient temperatures. He was right around 70F or 21C. And he says it turned out quite drinkable. I didn't have the crispness of a Kölsch, a bit more floral, possibly a decent summer ale. I'm wondering whether I should plan on such a batch in the future. I've mentioned this a couple times already. Absolutely. That yeast to me doesn't produce much of a difference whether it's fermented at 60 or 70. So, to each their own. If you think it does, then that's all good. In my experience, it really doesn't. And so I'll like I said, I ferment my Kölsch at 66F or 19C. I've made pale ale. I've made IPA. I have made a typical, more Americanized version of a blonde ale. I've made mock lagers with Dieter. The strain is really versatile. It is a top fermenting ale yeast. It is a Cerevisiae, not a Pastorianus. So, but it's so clean, and it really does, in my opinion, just emphasize the more sharper notes that I get from like popular hops of the day. So Galaxy and Citra and all of that. It really does kind of make the things that I'm looking for from those hops a little bit more punchy. I don't know. What about you, Kate? Have you ever used it for anything else?
So I haven't, but I'm actually really intrigued by that idea now. Because some of those, to me, it seems like it'd be, like a straight Cal Ale. I can't remember what the imperial conversion is, but the WLP 001 and those types of
flagship. That's AO7. Their flagship. It's all the same. Yeah. It's all Chico, right? Yeah.
There you go. So I would imagine this tasting a lot like a Chico strain. That AO7 or a Cal Ale. If you put it in a pale ale or something like that. I'd be interested to try it though. It sounds interesting.
So the other thing that I get from when I'm fermenting, we're kind of going off down a tangent, but I love this yeast. It's one of my favorite ones out there. When I ferment a beer like a hoppy ale with Dieter, what I get is a little bit more, and I think this makes sense, right? Considering that Kölsch is supposed to have that kind of bread crusty malt character. I get a little bit more emphasis of that even in my hoppier beers, which I love. I mean, that's a good thing for me. And so that's one of my things. I actually prefer prefer Dieter to things like Flagship, because Flagship to me is just so normal. I guess we've all had so many beers fermented with the Chico strain that a little bit of uniqueness that you get from that Kölsch strain, I think, is just money. So try it out.
That's fascinating. I want to try this now.
Yeah, I think you'll love it. We actually are probably going to move back the Hop Chronicles beers that we brew. We're probably going to go back to using Dieter because I feel like it just gets everything out of the way. You get a little bit of malt character and that nice punchy hop character. It's pretty money. So, all right. Final comment comes from Reddit user Zinger565. He or she says, 62% efficiency. What do you think led to a low number like that? If I had to guess, I would think the unadjusted filtered water screwed with the pH enough to cause issues with the shortened mash. I only say that because I've done several beers with almost the exact process, but I adjust my water and I've gotten 75% or more each time. Okay. Yes, maybe the fact that I didn't adjust the water had some sort of an impact on efficiency. However, like I said, when I bump up that mash rest to just 25 minutes, I get another 6 points or so out of efficiency. So, and that's without adjusting the water. I'm not sure. I've done an experiment, looking at higher mash pH. Jake did an experiment looking at really low mash pH. It really doesn't seem to have that huge of an impact, at least on the home brewing scale. So I'm not sure it was the unadjusted water that we can point the finger at, but maybe. Again, if you're going to do this, if you want my tip, it's just do a 25-minute mash rest instead of 20, and you'll get a few more points out of it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the easiest thing, anybody's talking about lower efficiency numbers, the easiest thing that I point to whenever somebody says, oh, I missed my number, or, oh, I hit over too high, what are you doing for sparge? If you're just doing a brew in the bag, though, where you're just taking the grains out and letting it drip, really the difference in efficiency, if you're talking about huge numbers or huge swings, to me has always sort of been the amount of grain that you're putting in, and then maybe the amount of time that it sits in there for it to do the conversion.
Yeah, well, and we've talked about this before, but Kai Troyster from, I believe his website is still up, Braukaiser, he did a series of experiments just on efficiency, conversion, and mash length. And what he found is basically what we've been replicating here. What we've been able to show here is that once you get to about 15% or 15 minutes into the mash rest, you are going to start to level off. That's about 60% efficiency typically. And then the extra percentages that you're going to get over time really start to slow down. I believe he said that by 30 minutes, the difference between a 30-minute and a 60-minute mash rest could basically be nothing, that all of the conversion at that point has generally taken place. And that's why I've kind of settled on 25 minutes. It's kind of nice. That extra 5 minutes makes the brew day feel a little bit less rushed. I eke a couple more points out in efficiency. So I'm using, 10 less grains of malt.
Yeah, 10 actual individual kernels.
Exactly. So anyways, Kölsch, it's a fantastic style. I absolutely love it. That is all the time we've got for this episode. Cade, any final thoughts on Kölsch or the short and shoddy method before we bounce?
Well, it's going to be like 98 today here in Texas. So, yeah, I'm going to definitely be having a Kölsch tonight. Probably more than one, to be honest.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so get out there and start drinking them Kölsch.
Hell yeah, man. You can head over to brulosophy.com to read about the recipe discussed in this episode, as well as everything else we're up to. The Brulosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brulosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brulosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brulosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.